Thank you, Jeremy, and good morning to everyone in Cambodia and in many other parts of the region. It's great to be with you and to have some fabulous panelists for this final session of the discussion today. And as Jeremy says, we're going to be focusing more on the role of government and industry associations and how governments and donor partners as well can support the development of a high quality, thriving ecosystem, and the way that RCEP will support all of those objectives being met. So we have some wonderful panelists. Let me get straight to them. So let me start perhaps with Excellency Ratsaravut, who is with us today. Good morning, Excellency. Wonderful to have you with us.
Good to you, Danny.
Good to see you again. Now, I'm sure you will blush when I read through your CV if I went through extensively, but let me just pick out a few of the highlights. He's currently, of course, the Director General for International Trade at the MOC since 2019. And His Excellency also acts as Cambodia's SEOM, the Senior Economic Official, which is essentially the most senior economic diplomat to ASEAN. And with Cambodia's assumption just in the last few days of the ASEAN Chairmanship for 2022, this is going to be a very big year for His Excellency. And we also have, because we have him here on our call, please don't be afraid to ask questions in that broader ASEAN context as well, because you very rarely get a good chunk of time with someone that has such a significant influence on the outcome of the year ahead. And just to conclude, in terms of his past experience, His Excellency was the lead negotiator for e-commerce in the RCEP agreement and also for the ASEAN agreement on e-commerce, among many others. He's earned his master's degree in business administration from the Southern Cross University in Australia. And so we can say just from that he has excellent pedigree and very good judgment as well. So welcome, Your Excellency. Now I'll turn to Mr. Monvarin as well. Thank you and good morning. And I think you've already been here for a chunk of time, so thank you for staying here with us. If you don't mind me, I'm going to read just a little bit of your background as well. Actually, the chairman and CEO of 3 companies, such as V Japan Tech Interco Limited, Asia Pacific Fredfort International School, and the Monvarin Investment Fund, I guess, investing in e-commerce, IT, software, and import and export. And most importantly, I think for today, is apart from being a practitioner in the e-commerce space, but he was elected as the first deputy president of the Cambodia E-Commerce Business Association, the CEA. And so in that sense, really brings a strong a private sector, what are the interests of private sector and engaging with government. And most importantly, what are the ways in which government and industry can work together to achieve really good outcomes, translating RCEP from an in principle kind of agreement to something much more substantive. So welcome as well, Mr. Monvarin. Now, I don't believe we have with us here, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are also going to be joined from a representative from the Australian Embassy, Mr. Anthony Sampson.
No,
I see he is here.
Anthony is online.
All right.
I'm here, Danny. I'm actually just there in the background.
All right, well, let me embarrass you then and tell the audience a little bit about who you are, Anthony. So currently the Economic Attaché and Second Secretary Development Cooperation at the Australian Embassy in Phnom Penh, but also was previously an economist in the Office of the Chief Economist at DFAT, and has previously served in Australia's Embassy in Honiara. He holds a Master of Labour Law and Industrial Relations from the University of Sydney and 2 bachelor's degrees in Economics and Social Science from the University of New South Wales. And before joining DFAT, interestingly, Anthony had worked as an advisor to the Arbitration Council Foundation in Cambodia. So a long pedigree and experience in both economic matters, but also the broader context of the Australia, Cambodia, and domestic Cambodia issues. So welcome, Anthony, as well for the discussion.
Excellencies, Danny, colleagues, friends, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Okay, well, let's get straight into it. The time is already marching along. So we're going to ask a series of questions, and we're going to save then some questions from the audience, but please do ask those questions using the Q&A or the chat, and we'll endeavour to get to those at the end. And remember, having the opportunity to have His Excellency here as the lead economic official in the very important and exciting year ahead for Cambodia and the context for the ASEAN agreements as well, we'll be very, we look forward to your questions as we go through. So to start off with, perhaps let's of course start with Your Excellency. And I wanted to ask a very general question about the way that RCEP supports the development of the e-commerce industry in Cambodia, and again from that government perspective. So question to all panelists, starting with His Excellency, does RCEP support the development of a domestic e-commerce industry in Cambodia? This is of course an international trade agreement which brings together the RCEP parties and focuses essentially on cross-border trade, goods, services, e-commerce, investment. What about the domestic scene? How does RCEP, or does RCEP support as well the development of a thriving e-commerce industry in Cambodia? So please, over to you, Your Excellency, and we look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Danny. It's nice to see you again on the screen after we have discussed a long time ago. First of all, since it is the first time for me to take the floor, would like to express my high respects to and my regard to His Excellency's Dr. Soksipana, Senior Advisor to the Royal Government of Cambodia, and also Excellency Samsak Heng is Secretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce, and Excellency Andre Samberg, Deputy Ambassador of Australia to Cambodia, Mr. Jeremy Gross, Director of ERIA, and all distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I have a great honor to join today's session with all of you. And I would like to say good morning to our colleagues in Cambodia and very good afternoon to our colleagues a part of the region. To begin with, I couldn't agree with the previous speakers that the COVID-19 pandemic crisis has amplified the crucial importance of e-commerce. Thus, we have not envisioned such crisis. We have been moving in the right direction, I would say. This is the case as the major FTAs incorporate e-commerce provisions. RCEP is no exception. From the holistic perspective, RCEP e-commerce chapter offers to promote electronic commerce among the country members, Cambodia included, and the wide use of the electronic commerce globally. Here we can standard for it to work out regionally and globally. Of course, it has first to start work out with locally. RCEP would support the development of domestic e-commerce industry in Cambodia by inducing confidence and trust in e-commerce, provide frameworks for consumer protection, data protection. It's the looping process as a domestic e-commerce industry cannot grow until there is trust. So we need trust in industry to grow. The more it grows, the more confidence and the trust the consumer have in the industry. More importantly, RCEP would enhance paperless trading, thereby facilitating regional trade and supply chain resilience. I can stop from here. I pass the floor to you back, Lenny.
Thank you, Excellency. Now can we please hear from the industry perspective, Mr. Monburi? Oh, you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Danny, and thank you, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. Thank you very much for my opportunity in this our dialogue and the last section. Actually, the agreement really offered the hope for our economic development in Cambodia. That is why long years ago we really, especially economic stakeholder, they really feel that they are isolated because there is nothing to support. But after the agreement, especially the government of Cambodia, they passed the law of the economic law and regulation. That is why the economic stakeholder know where they are going and what they will do. Especially the RCEP agreement can guide the stakeholders, economic stakeholder, to develop, and because they feel that they will be protected by the law and protected by the agreement. So actually, at least we know that the agreement can make the economic stakeholder more good feeling. They develop this what they have already done. Firstly, the secondly is also can make the small and medium enterprise. They can more develop their knowledge in choosing the economic electronic economic, because mostly in the agreement they strongly support the small and medium enterprise to develop choosing the electronic economic. And that is why I feel that this agreement, it really can help to develop the Cambodian economy, especially to make the Cambodian electronic economics develop more and more. Thank you, and we can discuss later.
Thank you very much. And to Anthony, your opening thoughts about whether the RCEP can support the development of a domestic e-commerce industry in Cambodia.
Thanks so much for the question, Danny. And again, Excellency Soksapanas Sinsokegan and my friend Excellency DG Saravut, thanks for the opportunity to be on this panel with you. You know, I think we've heard you know, a little bit about this throughout today's sessions, but it's repeated is the, you know, the signing of RCEP. One of the few bright spots, I think, like the rise of protectionism and trade wars, the fact that RCEP does include such a diverse group of nations, I think makes it even more remarkable. You know, that accounts for 30% of the global population, of GDP and so forth, making it the largest trade pact. You know, now zeroing in and looking at that in terms of what that means domestically. Well, you know, let me talk first about Australia as an Australian. You know, for us, it's an opportunity to expand into one of the fastest growing markets in the Asia Pacific. And I think this is key when we look at this in terms of our own development and development trajectory. Specifically on e-commerce, you know, when we're talking about things like payments and fintech and logistics and fulfillment and ICT in e-commerce, as well as education. So for Cambodia, I think, you know, by opening markets and making investment easier, Cambodian businesses can access technology, you know, the knowledge and tools that make them more competitive. You know, as an economist with a bit of a background in trade, you know, this is really fundamental to the way in which we see, you know, countries like Cambodia or all countries really being able to raise their own living standards. So it has that impact not only domestically but also in the region. Thanks, Danny. I'll stop there.
All right, great. Oh, some great comments to open up. So let's now expand a little bit. So we asked around the domestic economy and opportunities in Cambodia. Well, of course, the great promise of any large trade agreement, and this being the largest trade pact outside, I guess, of the multilateral level. What are the opportunities then for Cambodian firms to expand into the RCEP region? So as you would imagine, the normal growth trajectory starts locally then grows perhaps citywide and then nationwide. Are there opportunities for Cambodian firms, leading firms, to start to offer their services, maybe also their product trade and things, using e-commerce tools into the RCEP region, which is such a diverse group set of countries, rich nations, poorer nations, developed nations, developing nations, and a diverse population with different demands and needs. So really the question to government is, well, if there are opportunities for expansion using the RCEP pathways into these new countries for Cambodia, how can government assist in that process? What's industry's view of government's role to help companies to grow into the region? And what's government's view on how it itself can support industry and government companies to expand into the region? And then lastly, over to Anthony, I'll be asking around the support from Australia, but also more broadly from development partners to help drive that growth of great Cambodian entrepreneurs, not just to service Cambodian citizens and consumers, but to serve those outside in the broader RCEP region. So first to Excellency DG, how can government help great Cambodian companies expand in e-commerce into the RCEP region? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis, and thanks for your question. And yes, of course, it's apparently yes. I would put into two perspectives. First, the Cambodian firm is as SMEs and the startup are very relatively more competitive and capable. And the government has spared no efforts in the legal and institutional reform and trade development with the support and assistance under the regional and international initiatives and framework, so as to enhance competitiveness and capacity and engagement in the regional supply chain and the global value chains. In addition, this RCEP e-commerce chapter also offers ways for these members to work together to assist small and medium enterprises to overcome obstacles in the use of electronic commerce. From the other perspective, this RCEP e-commerce would also facilitate this e-commerce process in the region through these several factors, including but not limited to enable paperless trading, where members will be implementing initiatives which provides for the use of paperless trading and non-restriction of cross-border transfer of data, non-data localization requirement in all the member states. This we can, from the government perspective, that we can expand into the support under this RCEP agreement within the region. So thank you, Dennis, for the question again.
Thank you, Excellency. And now to Maureen, around what do you see as the opportunity for your members to expand into the region, into RCEP countries? And also, what role can or could government play in helping you and your members to expand your offering into neighboring countries, RCEP countries?
Thank you, Danny. Actually, if we look at to the RCEP countries, about 30% of the 30% of the population in the world, and also about 30% of the world GDP. So that is why it is not too small, but it is enough big for the markets, especially based on the any point, especially in the Chapter 12 of the RCEP agreement. It really identified that it is a good opportunity for Cambodian firm to consider or to be ready how to expand their service or company to other country. But firstly, we need to understand that it is also the good challenge And also, it is also the term of challenges that we need to be ready. Firstly, for any company that they are able and mean that they are ready, it should be the good time for them to expand to other country, because this is the new market. This is the new chance for them, because there is the that is why the RCEP really encourage, especially electronic commerce, to move to 15 countries in the region, so they can get this advantage from this development. But any country that is not ready, mean that they need to strengthen their quality. They need to strengthen their problem, especially how can we make up the bigger, what is the narrow street, what is the product that they can meet the new challenges from the other film from the RCEP country. This is I think that this is a good chance for the company that is ready, that is in. But this is the new challenges for the company that is not ready. So that is why we need to make more develop to be ready for the new challenges in the future, right? That is why my idea. Even though we get the opportunity for this agreement, but we also meet the challenges that we need to be solved, especially both the private sector, as the economic stakeholder and the government need to work together. How can we get the new benefit from this agreement? Thank you very much. And I hope that the government will can help, especially how we can compete with the other countries, especially based on how can we compete with the product, especially our small and medium enterprise. How can they compete with the other RCEP country, especially the cost, especially how to make the narrow production to be bigger, and how can we lower the cost expense of logistics. That is why this is the problem that we need to solve to compete, to expand our Cambodian firm to other countries. So, for example, right now, if we expand to Thailand, right? So, what sort of product will be go? And that is why. So, if we go there, it will meet the competition. So, based on the high competition, that is why we need to focus on the quality, we need to focus on the price, and we need to focus on the cost of service to bring to Thailand. That is why I hope that the government will solve what is the problem. Right? Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, very, very comprehensive answer. And there's clearly a big challenge ahead for both government and industry to meet, as you say, the opportunities with the right level of competitiveness and quality and price and all those types of things. So perhaps I'd like to ask Anthony then, I mean, feel free to share Australia's experience in this area, but also what development partners such as Australia can do to help really realize the opportunity that may present itself for Cambodian firms to expand into the region. How can we look at these issues of competitiveness, particularly in the digital sector?
Thanks, Danny. I really like this question, so thank you for it. I mean, as someone who's working in development, it's something that I'm really passionate about in terms of figuring out what is the best area for us to make our aid investments here in places like Cambodia. So I might just take that one step up a little bit. Question really ties into how our broader assistance has changed over time. middle income country. So zeroing in on e-commerce, I think that's followed a similar pathway here. Our investments here in Cambodia have slowly shifted out of, say, the investment in ICT infrastructure, which of course is vitally important to ensuring connectivity, reliability, and affordability. But shifting to creating the conditions for business and consumers to benefit from digital transformation. For Australia, our assistance here takes many forms, whether that be bilaterally, regionally, multi-country, or so forth. And we work with partners like yourself, Danny, like TradeWorthy, and also with ERIA, with Jeremy and his crew. So I'd love to have the opportunity to share just a little bit about some of the projects we're working on that are helping to create these economic opportunities, particularly for SMEs in Cambodia, and working with quite closely with the Ministry of Commerce. I think for us, SMEs really are at the heart, really are the engine room of sustainable growth, and that's a key principle of our broader aid program. So some of those initiatives include, we have an Australian e-commerce aid for trade fund, which in Cambodia is supporting the acceleration of Cambodia's e-commerce regulatory framework. That project, I'm proud to say, is delivered in partnership with TradeWorthy and the Ministry of Commerce. And that project has 3 key objectives. The first is to disseminate information on the e-commerce strategy and e-commerce law to the business community. So really at its heart, a key private sector focus. It trains government negotiators in the upcoming joint statement initiative, the JSI on e-commerce negotiations at the WTO, and it's something that Excellency Sinsok Keng and Excellency DG Sarabut and I have spoken about in great deal, and the importance of that work. It also advocates for and supports the participation of micro and small medium enterprises in the e-commerce ecosystem development. We also have a project in partnership with the UNDP under what's called our Resilience Fund for Cambodia that has been working a little bit more to support e-commerce continuity during the pandemic. So very much as a response to COVID-19 to help accelerate and onboard MSMEs, particularly ones out in the provinces and including women-led ones onto domestic marketplaces. Adding good practice guides in areas of interest such as cross-border e-commerce and women-led business transactions. It's also supporting the export readiness of SMEs to sell online and supporting their move to MOC's own Cambodia Trade platform. And also linking with upstream digital payment mechanisms. So making sure that there is that line of sight and linkages between the acceleration and adoption of electronic payment methods, which will of course continue to be vitally important in a post-pandemic environment, and all of the things that go along with that, including digital financial literacy and helping reduce the cost of business. I mentioned there, the focus on women-owned and women-operated businesses, and I think it's very important for me to point out that this is a core cross-cutting and mainstream issue for Australia, and one that we seek to promote through all of our aid investments. And of course, we've heard a little bit today, but there's our support for ERIA, which does involve several Cambodian ministries, focusing on capacity building activities in e-commerce and digital trade. And we've had an online training program for Ministry of Commerce officials. That's helping to create a sound regulatory environment for e-commerce. Also hoping to encourage more vendors and merchants to diversify their sales channels and adopt some of the ICT and tools necessary to help with that transition online. Through this work, Australia is supporting Cambodia to accelerate the adoption of commitments made under the ASEAN e-commerce agreement, all the RCEP e-commerce provisions. And these areas include online consumer protection, online IP, paperless trading, and so forth. We also have, lastly, I'll just finish off with our work through the ASEAN Australia Development Cooperation Program. I'm pleased to support the Ministry of Commerce, who have been part of that assistance, which has helped in the formulation and implementation of a work plan for the implementation of the ASEAN e-commerce agreement. And again, this project is implemented by our friends at TradeWorthy and the Asia Trade Centre in Singapore. I might leave it there, Danny, back to you. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Anthony. And what strikes me from those comments is that there are so many different investments and interventions that need to be made. There's no one answer to supporting industry to tap into these types of opportunities. And a particular focus does always need to be on the more vulnerable MSME, the smaller side of the sector, and how to develop their expertise. We've heard that from all of our panelists. And I see there's a comment that's come through as well that there's actually a taxation incentive for SMEs in Cambodia that are provided with a tax incentive for those carrying on business in services and innovation sectors. So as you can see, it takes many, many different interventions from many, development, competitiveness, cost issues, taxation breaks and incentives, many parts of that ecosystem to develop a competitive sector to take on opportunities around the world. Okay, our second to last question for the questions from the audience, and then a wrap up. And this turns to the question of regulation and the role that government and industry how they work together, sometimes not always perfectly, but how they learn from each other. And what we've seen in e-commerce development is that typically the businesses are usually 1 or 2 or 3 steps ahead of the regulation. Regulation takes time. It needs to be consulted. It needs to be assessed, compared to international standards. And businesses are getting up every day, entrepreneurs are getting up every day thinking, how can I create new opportunities for expanding my business, new technologies, new digital platforms, whatever they may be. So because you have this kind of cat and mouse game between the law and then what industry is doing, sometimes by the time a law is in place, the technology or the platform has now created new opportunity or challenges, for governments. So instead of viewing it as this cat and mouse game, how can government and industry support each other to develop an ecosystem, a legal regulatory infrastructure that maintains a fair but also a competitive sector? And in particular, how do we protect the smaller, the MSME, those that are really trying to develop at the beginning of their business cycle to grow into bigger industry? So how can government and industry work together to support a competitive environment in the e-commerce sector? How do the laws try to achieve that? Rather than every new entrepreneur, you sort of say, well, we're going to bang them on the head with a new law because we're worried that it could change the way our laws are implemented. So again, to our friend DG, Excellency, any thoughts about how government can stimulate the environment for MSMEs, for industry, but also maintain a fair, well-regulated system, please?
Again, thank you, Danny, for the question. And speaking from the government perspective again, I would say that we would target this promoting our Cambodian products via electronic means to the rest of the region by creating another environment conducive to the domestic industry to grow, strengthen and enhance the competitiveness and capacity to the point that they can tap into the region markets and compete with the rest of the region. The government would support this private sector through the various laws and regulations, as I mentioned earlier. For example, like new investment law offers a greater incentive and guarantee to the investment projects that, number one, they can contribute to the skill training, research and the development and innovation. Second is nurture the growth of the small and SMEs by providing support to our SMEs via skill training and so on and so forth. This kind of is a government perspective. You know, over the last 3 years, Cambodia had implemented the major pieces of legislation, particularly on this law on e-commerce and law on consumer protection and law on competition, among others, with the aim exactly support is the industry development and introducing and fostering a competitive and protective culture. These three laws work in conjunction with one another, along with other pieces of the legislation. MSMEs particularly tend to be the focus while creating this legislation. They are need support and foster to grow. In this industry, government has a very important role in providing the proper protection in order for them to grow. Through various government-led activities such as the trade shows and exhibition to showcase the MSME products, with the MOC have been doing over the past years. Our Ministry of Commerce, along with the government, will look into the implement the further legislation mechanism to create a level playing field for the competition provided by the law on competition, which also look to foster the growth among the MSMEs in the midst of the open economy provided by the RCEP. In addition, our ministry is implementing an e-commerce project called the Go for eCam projects, with aims to increase the economic opportunity to participate in both domestic and cross-border market. A B2B2C marketplace platform called CambodiaTrade.com is being built to bring MSME on board to sell their products. Moreover, in this project, we help MSMEs to develop their e-commerce skills and entrepreneurship through two programs. One, incubation, and another one is the innovation, the challenges program, which are currently implemented by our development partner, which is the UNDP Cambodia. Thank you very much, Danny.
Thank you again, a really comprehensive answer. And now over to you, Monboen. Tell us a little bit about, from the industry perspective, you know, where the balance lies in terms of regulation and how we can work together with government to develop particularly the more vulnerable or the new beginners, the MSMEs in the sector, please.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Actually, economic sector, especially the economic stakeholder, they start operate in Cambodia long years before the economic law and regulation passed and imposed in 2019, right, Cambodia. However, now it is the law is in place, and that is why it is also the good time for private economic sector. They feel that they are good because they have the law to protect them, especially for the economic stakeholder. Second, they feel that the law will protect the also make the consumer confident, because the economic could not reach success if there is no consumer confidence. That is, the law, it really can protect the consumer confidence. That is the second. And the third, the law also can protect the small and medium enterprise, because the economic also could not get successful. It's the small and medium enterprise could not be protected and could not get successful, especially. So in this time, the private and especially Cambodian Business Association as well, we are ready to work with the government. How can we let the private economic stakeholder to get the benefit from the law and to get the opportunity to develop their business, especially in the economic sector. So let them understand what it doesn't mean and what the benefit from the RCEP agreement. So Cambodia Business Association is really play a role to work with the private business economic sector and also with the government. Like last month, we also organized with the Ministry of Commerce to hold the dialogues because we want to make the private sector to understand and what they concern, they can raise in the dialogue. This is the good opportunity that we hope that both the government and both the private economic sector and the national and the overseas agency can work together to promote the economic in Cambodia.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, over to Anthony, if you're willing to share anything from the Australian experience of regulating for a sector that's grown phenomenally. I think famously, Australia has one of the most tightly regulated prudential, authorities in the world, APRA, which is a model to many countries. Yet we are seeing a thriving fintech industry. So I think we had the first bank list on the Australian Stock Exchange just last week in 25 years. So something's going okay, something's going right. Would love to hear your thoughts as well from the Australian experience before we wrap up.
Yeah, good question and good introduction there, Danny. I mean, I think I want to echo first, the words of Mom Farin just there. Having a fair and competitive sector is key to having a functioning digital market, right? I think that's a fundamental principle, I guess we've got to start with. Looking at it in terms of what RCEP is doing to support this, or what through that agreement, the chapter on e-commerce is designed to support digital trade to align domestic regulations on e-commerce to the UN model law on e-commerce. And in that, I think it's key that consumer confidence and safety are seen as being fundamental. And this is crucial to ensuring both the proper functioning and facilitation of a digital market. I think that's key. So, for instance, RCEP is expected to improve e-commerce through, improving the general obligations between parties, as well as specific requirements on some of those parties, particularly in terms of cross-border e-commerce trade and some of the constraints that are placed on parties in terms of data localization, for example. And so this is partly designed to increase that free flow of data, which is also then in turn meant to help help the market function a little bit more effectively. I'm also in the business of public policy and working for governments, right? So I think also this can't be unconstrained as well, and there is needs for the protection of particular sorts of data for legitimate public policy objectives. And so I guess as part of this, you have a little bit of a balancing game to try and create some level of fairness that go some way to be part of that enabling environment, while also not putting unnecessary constraints. So trying to figure out how to create a fair regional environment that's conducive to e-commerce, while not providing an environment that's unnecessarily burdensome. And Danny, you spoke about the APRA example. Probably best not to go down that pathway too much in today's session, but certainly an example and some arguments on both sides around depending on where you sit, about the levels of regulation and impacts on the ability of that sector in order to do business. So yeah, I think that's probably where I'll leave it. You know, we're trying to find that balance, being marketing enabling rather than constraining, looking at some of those key principles that need to underpin that, as well as transparency, for example. You know, we've heard from Excellency DG and from Varin about this need to create a level playing field, and I think that's very key to help maintaining that fairness and competitiveness in the sector. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. Well, time has moved way too fast, so we're up to the very last question. I'm going to actually skip a question that I had and ask the one that's been asked by our participant Hui Ying Li, which is to DG Excellency. Noted that ASEAN has committed to negotiate an ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement. Why is it timely to negotiate this? And how would it help Cambodia develop its digital and e-commerce sectors? So a question specifically to you, Excellency, about the commitment that Cambodia has made, and I guess particularly given your chairmanship next year and interest in this area, the Digital Economy Framework Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny, to bring up this audience question, particularly to the question to me. We are not open up any negotiation for this all the ASEAN agreement on e-commerce. We are developing kind of the action plan, which is getting support from this our development partner, especially from DFAT Australia, to how we can implement effectively our ASEAN agreement on e-commerce. So we are not reopen text or whatever agreement. And also in terms of the RCEP e-commerce chapter, we concluded we didn't open any discussion or negotiations. Yeah, for rest assured that no additional negotiation on that. Only the aspect that we need to come up with the action plan, how to implement this effectively on our e-commerce agreement in the region, also is within the under the RCEP. So this is an answer to this audience concern about we are not negotiation at all. Okay. Regarding to the part of the questions, I like to bring attention to all the audience that you know, all the current state is more often than not, some startup or newly established firm would be, however, facing the very tough competition, and especially those are coming in from the rest of the RCEP region. They would need some government support and cooperation to build a concrete foundation. For example, being creative and capable in catching up with the state-of-art digital technology, such as AI, big data, cybersecurity, and Internet of Things are foundation. The ultimate goal is to create a competitive environment that does not hinder domestic industry development, while the domestic industry would not need much government support to thrive, but to be able to enter into the market and sustain themselves. This is how it's from the government perspective. Thank you very much, and thank Denny. The floor to you.
Okay, thanks, Excellency, for the clarification. So look, we need to unfortunately wrap up. I think this is a subject that we could explore for many, many hours. And wouldn't it be nice to do it all in person again? Maybe that could be our hope for the coming year. It seems as though there is a significant understanding and appreciation of the opportunity that RCEP offers, both growth domestically in e-commerce, but also some new horizons being opened up from RCEP around looking at Cambodian e-commerce entrepreneurs and hopefully MSMEs and female entrepreneurs in particular to look at the expansion into new markets. But it's going to need real support for competitiveness across a whole range of measures. And there's no one silver bullet. It needs support from donor partners. It needs support from government. It needs industry to bring organizations together to understand, for example, the impact of the new investment law and, of course, the e-commerce law previously. So MSMEs and female entrepreneurs will be a key focus for government and also from donor partners. So with that, I thank you, Excellency Callebaut. We wish you all the very best with 2022 and your very important year ahead. Mr. Montvarin, with you and your members and the association and your own private investments, much success and expansion into the region. And Anthony, the Government of Australia and donor partners that you represent as well, potentially, all the success in designing effective, wonderful, well-received programs. And with that, thank you very much. And over to Jeremy for the floor. Thank you.